Here now, attorney, legal analyst Dina Dahl, who's with me here in our New York studio. What was your reaction when you heard this was overturned today?
Yeah, I mean, it was surprising. I followed the trial, and the evidence against him seemed strong. The fact that he got a conviction seemed likely. But the reasoning is very sound. Basically, what the Supreme Court there said was the prosecution made an agreement with him. We won't continue to prosecute you if you pay this $10,000. The deal was done, and then a second prosecutor changed his mind, and they said, not so fast.
Right.
You know, he detrimentally relied on that first agreement. You have to basically stick with that.
That's interesting. So it's in the timeline. I'm going to go through this because people remember, they don't remember the details. So January, the alleged incident, these two masked men yelling racist and homophobic slurs, he claims. Then a person of interest arrested in February. Smollett later charged with disorderly conduct and falsifying a police report. Arrested February 21st, pleads not guilty in March, and then he's cleared. This is interesting. So he's cleared in March 26th of all the charges, but by February, new charges are brought against him, and that second trial begins in November, found guilty in December, and sentenced to jail time and a fine in March. So it's March 10th, 2022 that he was released from jail, and then we fast forward to today with the conviction overturned. So we remember kind of what happened, that he was accused of making the whole thing up. It was a hoax, but you forget kind of these legal intricacies. So you think from a legal perspective, this decision made a lot of sense today.
Yeah, essentially they said his due process rights were violated. You had a non-prosecution agreement with him.
Yeah.
It wasn't a not today agreement. You know, he's not paying you $10,000 so you can refile with him the next day. And essentially that is what the prosecution did. They essentially changed their mind after making a deal with them. And the Supreme Court said it defied credulity that you would be willing to pay $10,000 just to get prosecuted the next day. And that was the due process violation, essentially making a deal and then changing the deal.
So it's not like the guy didn't make the whole thing up or that it wasn't a hoax or anything like that, but, you know, you're a lawyer. Was this a surprising mistake? Is that how would you describe it by the prosecutor, or?
Well, it's interesting because this is exactly what happened with Bill Cosby. His conviction was also overturned because of a due process violation, because he also made a deal with the prosecution who said he wasn't going to prosecute him. He ended up testifying in a civil lawsuit. That was used against him at trial, and his conviction overturned the same reason. You know, you made a deal. You can't then change the deal when a defendant relies on that. But the Supreme Court there did make a point of saying this was not based on the evidence at trial. But, you know, you made a choice. You have to stick with it.
Right. So they had that, you know, it is a strange situation, or maybe not. Like you say, there's the Cosby example, but do things like this happen often, or you wouldn't say often, right?
Definitely not often. And
right.
I think the reason why it has happened in both of these high-profile cases, because the public opinion becomes involved. And the public was upset that that first prosecution, you know, let him slide so easily with the $10,000 ball. There was a bit of a public uproar. Same with the Cosby situation. And then a second prosecution, you know, making that different decision. An everyday person, you know, the public doesn't buy in as much. There's not as much pressure for the prosecution to, let's say, change their mind.
One other high-profile case while you're here, that news conference continues with his attorney, that I wanted to talk to you about is here in New York City. We've been covering it. Defense, I believe, is still presenting their case in this Daniel Penny trial. He's this Marine who was on the subway and, you know, was accused of killing a homeless man who'd become unruly on the subway with a chokehold. And I was looking even at some of the testimony. You see the charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide with a max sentence of 15 years for Penny. The testimony today, they're focused on what was the actual cause of death. Was it the chokehold or was it something else? Impressions on this trial, and, you know, because it's a lot of people around here are talking about it, obviously, because of what's going on in the city.
Well, it's not a surprise that the defense put on their own expert saying the cause of death was not his chokehold, because there's really only two areas where he gets an acquittal here. One, the jury believes the defense of others' claim, and the cause of death. Otherwise, this is on tape. There's not a lot of wiggle room for the defense. It was a stretch, I think, their cause of death. I don't know if that is as helpful, but I'm not surprised they went there.
The defense is stretching.
Yeah, I think the defense was stretching when saying because he has sickle cell disease, because he was maybe on this synthetic marijuana, then this chokehold didn't kill him. Because the fact is, under the law, you kind of take the person as you find them. It doesn't mean that everybody with a certain disease or everybody on medication, legal or not, cannot be like murdered under the law. The standard is, was that a contributory cause?
Right.
So I think, he was in a chokehold between 5 to 6 minutes.
And that's the thing, right? That's the, you see, Jordan Neely is the man who died in this case, is that's the question here, is not about whether or not, Penny had the right to defend either himself or other people on the train, or he was acting as a quote-unquote good Samaritan in that case, but how long did he keep him in the chokehold for? And what does the law say about all of this?
Well, the cause of death is exactly that. And it also goes to his defense of others claim. Was the cause of death the chokehold? Contributing factors, they're going to hash it out with the experts. In terms of this defense of others claims, in order, that becomes, he has to prove that. It becomes an affirmative defense. And so, the balance becomes a little bit harder for him. He has to show that there was this imminent risk of death or serious bodily harm. That maybe you can argue based on a lot of the witnesses saying they were afraid.
Right.
Can they retreat? Not really. They're all trapped in this subway. That's strong for him. But then the third one is you have to do like the minimum amount of harm. And then that is going to get into that question of, how much after he was in the chokehold when he was no longer resisting.
Right.
And the discrepancies around the witnesses, some of them asking him to stop. Those details are going to be what the jury is going to be talking about in that jury room.
All right, Dina, thank you for all of that on those two cases.